Great. Hi, everybody.
Streaming
Thanks
live.
for joining us tonight. We are live here on Facebook. We're so excited to have Laurie King and Leslie Klinger with us tonight. Laurie King is the award-winning best-selling author of 16 Mary Russell mysteries, 5 contemporary novels featuring Kate Martinelli, the Stuyvesant and Gray novels Touchstone and The Bones of Paris, and acclaimed standalone novels Folly and Lockdown. She lives in Northern California, where she is at work on her next Mary Russell mystery. Leslie Klinger is one of the world's foremost authorities on Sherlock Holmes. He is the editor of the three-volume The New Annotated Sherlock Holmes. The first 2 volumes, The Complete Short Stories, won an Edgar for Best Critical Biographical Work. He is also the editor of the hugely successful The New Annotated H.P. Lovecraft. He is a member of the Baker Street Irregulars and lives in Malibu, California. How are y'all tonight?
Great.
Great.
So if you guys are watching on Facebook and you have any questions for either of them, just pop them in the comments. We'll be monitoring those and we'll leave some time for them at the end. We have signed book plates for copies of Riviera Gold or the new in paperback for the sake of the game Sherlock Holmes collection. There's going to be another one called In League with Sherlock Holmes coming out in December that's also available for pre-order. So I am going to pop away and let you guys chat, and I will see you in a little bit.
Thank you. Hi, Les.
Hi, Laurie. It's so nice to do this together again. I was thinking as we were starting, I was thinking about the first time that you and I ever did an event together. And I was so excited. My first event was at the Poison Pen.
Oh, yeah.
And I got there and there were 80 people there. And I thought, wow, I am obviously really hot stuff. That was together with you.
Sure.
And then I went back the next year by myself and there were 4 people. So I got a little perspective in the interim. So anyway,
Well,
you and I have done this so many times and it's always so much fun to be together and talk about things, homes, things, books, etc.
Yeah.
So, and an excuse to start drinking early.
I know. So
what are you drinking?
Are you drinking beer with ice?
No, this is actually an old school Scotch and soda.
Okay. Well, so that everybody in the audience knows, Les is a serious wine lover. I mean, in a major way. He goes to places because of their wine cellar, and I'm a beer drinker myself, so I'm just a heathen to begin with. So I thought I'd really get under Les's complete goat tonight by drinking a red wine spritzer.
Hey,
it's got about
whatever.
This much, really cheap, and I think it's probably Merlot to add insult to injury, and Pellegrino water. So there you go.
There's hope for you. Someday you'll learn. I mean, I started out drinking, Gallo Hardy Burgundy and Spagnata. Do you remember Spagnata?
Oh yeah, I remember Spagnata. Yeah. Wild Turkey. Were you of the Wild Turkey generation?
No, one of my fraternity brothers back in the day used to drink Jack Daniels. That was really sophisticated.
Yeah.
I was drinking beer. He was drinking Jack Daniels. So
yeah.
That was a long time ago.
I've never been an alcohol drinker, but I do like beer, and I used to like red wine. I used to drink it, by preference, but I got tired of it. And
our friend Mr. Holmes is one of those that doesn't really indulge very often in the canon, but there's been a lot of literature that goes like so much Sherlockian literature does, like literature. So much scholarship that goes like this. I love X. I love Sherlock Holmes, therefore Sherlock Holmes must have loved X. My very first Sherlockian paper was about Sherlock Holmes and wine, because I thought I had some things to say about one of the stories. But I'm trying to think, there's not a lot of, Mary doesn't really drink. And she drinks occasionally, but.
Mostly tea. They mostly, in most of the books, until very recently, they've been almost exclusively in horribly cold climates. And so they really look forward to cups of tea.
But on the Riviera here, they managed in the last book. Wow. Holmes goes all out.
There they are. They're actually warm.
And
Actually,
he buys a really expensive bottle of juice there. We don't know what it is, but
well, I'm waiting for you to tell me.
well, I'll have to analyze it further. We don't have a lot of tasting notes, so I can't
No.
really deduce much.
No, that's
But
true.
he does spring for something really expensive, and my sense was that Mary got it. She understood why this was somehow different from a wine spritzer.
Okay.
That's my sense. You may deny that.
I'm sure. We'll have to wait and hear what Russell has to say on her Twitter feed about good wines to see if she has a
Okay,
favorite.
we'll see. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Boy, I love her Twitter feeds. It's been a long time since she and I had a conversation. You remember we did a Twinterview? How long ago was that?
Yeah, I believe actually, Les, this is a new revelation. I won't say it's an exclusive because it'll go beyond this, but I believe that I personally am scheduled to have a conversation with Ms. Russell later in the summer.
Wow.
I know.
Well, I mean, I assume that you have talked to her from time to time, and you
Yeah.
show her the manuscript.
Yeah.
She blue pencils parts of it, and
Yeah.
but mostly business. You haven't had a lot of social conversations over
There've
years.
been a couple of interviews between the two of us, conversations and so forth, and oh yeah, I mean, I see her regularly when I'm in England, but
Well, it's interesting. I mean, one of the things that you can do with Twitter and some things like that is, you can sort of converse at your own speed. I mean, I'm not suggesting that Miss Russell is somehow frail, but she is getting older. And, to have this is one of the nice things about email and Twitter is that you can sort of take your time to think about what you want to say. And conversations have built-in pauses. So
we will see. Yeah, I tend not to do much Twitter. I do have a Twitter feed, but I make no pretenses to actually be doing it myself. My brother.
Oh, I'd be very nervous talking Miss Russell directly. I mean, she'd talk rings around me. It's just she's quick.
She's pretty good. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it's one of the things that we writers wish we could do is speak as well as the characters in our books manage to produce repartee and insults. Take some of those clever, witty remarks in the books that
yes.
Characters.
If only I'd said that. Yes.
Yeah, it takes me 2 weeks to come up with them.
Well, stepping back a moment out of the meta discussion here.
Yes.
Where did Mary come from? How did she come into your life?
Okay, so are we being canonical here, or?
No, I mean, really, why Mary Russell? I mean, I know that you decided many years ago, just seems like yesterday, that you wanted to write a book. And where did Mary Russell come from? She just kind of walked in the door and.
Yeah, basically. I was in my 30s. I was mid-30s. I had played around with a novel beforehand. I'd written about 2/3 of a science fiction novel, kind of futuristic, and discovered that I really had no clue how to finish it. So I put it away for a number of years. But then the kids grew up a little bit, and I had a few hours a week to myself, and I wanted to write a story about that extraordinary mind. The mind that is Sherlock Holmes, that sees all the details, that knows how many steps he's walked up, even if he's only been up the stairway once, that catches everything and analyzes it down to the core. And I wanted to write that as a developing kind of coming of age story of a young mind who was made in that image. And so that was Mary Russell. And it kind of seemed like the most interesting thing would be to put the two of them next to each other and to see how they were similar and how they were different, which has been, interesting to watch how that develops over the books. I
Had
think
you
the
read
first-
other pastiche? Had you read other, right, besides the originals, had you read other stories about Holmes?
Oh, I'm
by
sure
other
I had
writers?
read some. I mean, I'm sure I must have read the sort of basic pastiches like 7% Solution. I mean, this would have been the 1987.
Mhm.
So this sort of, I think.
Well, and of
the
course, we had the Rathbone films, which were clearly pastiche in a sense,
Well,
and all those things.
Jeremy Brett ones were ongoing.
Right,
and I
but
think that
those were
maybe-
true. Those were not pastiche. Those were the
No.
original stories.
Right,
So
yeah,
that's what I'm
yeah.
saying. But we'd had other things that had been popular. There had been television. There had been the old films that were pastiche in that sense. They were made up new stories.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that was sort of out there, I guess.
And when I started writing, I mean, literally when I started writing and got to the end of the first sentence, I realized that I knew basically nothing about Sherlock Holmes. And perhaps I should remedy that before I went too much further. So I went out and bought the two paperback complete collection, all 60 stories in 2 mass market size paperbacks with extremely small print, and started reading my way through them. And so I really did come to Holmes as an adult, unlike I think most people who get into Holmes seriously have known the stories since they were young. And I had obviously read some of them. I mean, you can't get through school without reading
Right.
The
Right.
Speckled Band and Hound of the Baskervilles. But I came to them as an adult, and I could see the interesting character that he was, other than just a brilliant mind, which is, I mean, looking at Conan Doyle as a writer, being a writer myself, it fills me with awe how the man can produce such a complex character when he really doesn't believe in him. I mean, he really wrote the Holmes stories as sort of, I think he was serious about his first ones,
Yeah.
but certainly after he killed him off, he really wrote them primarily to pay the bills. And
I think so. I agree. I think so too.
and some of them show that, but others, I think, you know, they really are interestingly complex as a character. And when I started to write them, I was mostly writing Russell from Russell's point of view. They're first person stories. And so I wrote about Mary Russell, about her point of view, and Holmes was fairly static. He really didn't develop much as a person until, I don't know, half a dozen books in. I started becoming interested in him as a character. And it was probably around the time that I was doing Locked Rooms, because Locked Rooms, you suddenly get chapters written from his point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the structure of the book, you have to mistrust Russell's point of view. She thinks she knows stuff and she doesn't. And you have to see Holmes looking at her and thinking, why isn't she noticing this? And I think after that, I was interested in him as a character and as him developing and looking at how a man of his age would change when given not only an apprentice, but a woman who challenges him in all kinds of ways, and how that would change him. So I think that now you get a lot more development of personality in the books than you did in the early ones.
I think that's really an important perspective on Holmes, and I think it's rarely been done. There is a wonderful, if you haven't read June Thompson's book called Holmes and Watson, it's really very special in that it's a psychological biography of sort of how the relationship. Now she focuses on how the relationship between Holmes and Watson changes over the years as their friendship develops and all that. But it's really it hasn't been done much. I mean, mostly, it's hard with the stories because the stories today for a modern reader, I think modern readers, there's no mysteries. You know, they're sort of filled with cliches, what we now think of as cliches. Well, yeah, there are cliches that Conan Doyle invented in most cases, but yeah. So, you know,
like Shakespeare, all these cliches that stuck in there.
Right. You know, they're not these, you know, right, all those quotes, you know, Shakespeare, he obviously plagiarized somebody. It's hard to enjoy the stories as mysteries these days as an adult. And by the way, like you, I didn't start really reading the stories till I was in law school. Very, very much later than the average Sherlockian. But the friendship, you know, the relationship between the men and just sort of the warmth of their company, I think is why many adults love to read the stories over and over again. It's not because they're getting surprised by the mystery. It's because they just enjoy being with these two guys. And you've taken that and made it another person that's also equally enjoyable to be with because she's just so darn interesting.
Well, thank you. So speaking of friendships. You and Neil Gaiman have known each other for a number of years. You were both Sherlockians.
And we met at a dinner of the Baker Street Irregulars.
Yeah. So for those of you who, for some bizarre reason, don't know Leslie S. Klinger, Les is Mr. Annotator. He has perfected the art of the annotation.
Oh, thank you.
Whether it's tongue-in-cheek, real, or a little bit stepped back. But most recently, he has done The Annotated American Gods, which is a fabulous novel. And was it HBO? Is that?
Stars.
Stars, that's right. A series. And Neil wrote this book a number of years ago. Les bugged him for years to say, please, can I annotate you? Now, I have been lightly annotated by Les Klinger. The first 2 chapters of Beekeeper's Apprentice are in the ebook of the Mary Russell Companion. But someday we'll go on and do the rest of them.
Yes, I was thinking about that.
In between his real projects. So tell us a little bit about your friendship with Neil and the Annotated American Gods.
Well, it started, as I said, we met at a Baker Street Irregulars dinner. The head of the Irregulars seated us together because he just thought we'd hit it off. This was probably back around 2003, 2002, 2003, something like that. And we did. I spent the dinner whispering in Neil's ear. Now, this strange thing that we're doing here is because of this and so on. And we got to be friends. And when he saw the annotated Sherlock Holmes in the galleys, he had some very helpful suggestions about how to do things better and format them and so on. When I did my next book, which you have there, I think, which is the Annotated Dracula, I asked Neil to write the introduction for that, which he did very kindly. And anyway, we became friends. And at some point we were having lunch and he said to me, by the way, are you actually any good as a lawyer? And I said, well, yeah. He said, good, because I need a lawyer. Would you be my lawyer? So I've been his personal attorney and friend now for a long time. And this whole idea of sort of annotating Neil first started with Sandman, with his comics of Sandman. He would call me up and he'd say, you should do this for your next annotated book. And I'd say, gee, that's great, Neil. I love that book. You love that book, but nobody's going to buy it because it's just not a big popular book. So, but he had lots of suggestions, and I'd always joked with him about doing an annotated edition of Sandman, which is 78 issues of a comic book. And he always said, let's wait till I'm dead. And then one day, and I've told this story, I think, in the introduction to Annotated Sandman, he called me up and said, I'm starting to forget why I wrote some of the things that I wrote, because he wrote that in the 80s and the 90s. And we should do this. I'm calling DC. And I said, okay. He called DC Comics and they said, okay, we'll do the annotated Sandman. So we did 4 massive volumes of the comics with 1,000 footnotes, etc. So I'm trying to think, where did American Gods come from? Somewhere along the way, I had said to him something about this. And frankly, he'd always said that when it first came out, people were saying to him, gee, we need footnotes explaining who a lot of these gods are and the characters in the book and all that. And eventually, by then, not in 2000 when it first came out, but at some point he started saying, wait for the Klinger annotated, which didn't exist and which wasn't even a fantasy in either of our minds.
Wasn't even a thing yet, yes.
Yeah, but at some point, same thing. He called up HarperCollins and said, we should do annotated American Gods. And they said, gee, sounds great. So we did. It was really a treat because he, as he had done for Sandman, sort of opened up his files. And I basically went back to his house and spent 3 days going through literal bushel baskets full of manuscript, journals, notes, drawings, outlines, all kinds of things, and tried to put a lot of those into the notes. Because one of the things that I decided I would do with this book, there are actually, well, there's the first draft, then there's the sort of his final draft, then there's what was first published, which was shortened by about 40% from his manuscript. And then there is the anniversary edition that came out that restored a lot of the stuff that he'd had to cut. A little of it was new material. Much of it had been written before and just cut by his editor. And so one of the things I wanted to do here for the learning writers, for the readers who want to learn about writing, was to show sort of how the book evolved and how it went from outline to draft to manuscript to first edition, second edition, and so on. So there are footnotes that show in many, many places the changes between the various editions and the manuscript and the drafts and so on, so that people can understand more about the craft of writing and sort of how these books come into existence. They aren't born, fully grown, as you know perfectly well.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating as a careful read, the book. So, I mean, all your things are interesting, but I found this one in particular because you had all those drafts. I mean, you don't always have the multiple drafts when you're writing, you know.
And I'm really, I mean, as you know, I'm very interested in text. I love getting into the text. So in the case of Dracula, for example, I was very lucky. I basically got to go see, thank you for holding it up, beautiful cover. I love the cover.
Yeah.
Although Annotated American Gods has the first ever annotated dust jacket.
It's an annotated cover, yes. Yeah.
Yes. But for Dracula, I got to go see the manuscript of Dracula. It's actually a typescript that's owned by now the Paul Allen estate. And I got to spend days going over that. And so again, I was able to sort of go through and show this was in the manuscript, this got cut, this got substituted, and so on. I find that stuff really interesting. So, and in the Sherlockian world too. I mean, the Sherlockian world, you know, the Holy Grail is the original manuscripts of the stories. Yeah.
When he's still Sharonford.
Well, and when we can see in my game playing mode, as we Sherlockians do, the manuscripts to me are the closest to Watson's notes. We're never going to find Watson's notes, but the manuscripts are before editors sort of got their hands on the way Watson wanted to write it.
Yeah. Well, in case you or anyone out there is curious, I don't always carry Dracula around with me. I mean, the Neil Gaiman one hasn't yet found it. Basically my daughter hasn't stolen it yet, so I still get to have it.
That's very good.
But the Dracula one is actually on my file of current projects because.
Why is that, Laurie?
Well,
Holmes had, now, by the way, I will say there are some hints. This is not a spoiler, but in Riviera Gold, Holmes does mention that he was handling something in Romania.
in Romania, they're off to Romania, or more precisely to Transylvania, which I was extremely pleased to find that that is how it actually is pronounced. It's not Transylvania, it's Transylvania. And so they're going off there, and what can you say? What do you find in Transylvania? But
Well, you
Thanks, dude.
certainly don't find vampires because, I mean, first of all, we know that Holmes has no truck for the supernatural. No ghosts need apply, he says.
This firm is built upon the ground.
Stands flat-footed on the ground, yes. And second, interestingly, in Transylvania, I found when I was doing research, they don't really have any vampire legends. There's a creature known as the Strigoi, which is some characteristics of vampires, but they didn't have a lot of vampire legends. And for many years, Dracula was not available in Romania. It only came out like in the 80s or something in Romania.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really funny. I know that you actually went to Romania to do research.
Mhm.
The IRS is watching the show, so we'll talk about that. So yes, it was purely a research trip.
Absolutely.
So, and I'm sure you found the same thing, that they've now sort of made Dracula into a tourist industry.
Yeah, yeah.
Now you went to
And I
Grand
think-
Castle, right?
Yeah, I think that the whole tourist side of Dracula came in relatively late. I haven't yet been, in touch with the people who will know.
I think that's
But
right.
I have a feeling
It was
that
after the
when they were-
communists.
Yeah, I have a feeling it was in the communist era. They were trying to build up a way of bringing people into there for anything, and I think that they decided, oh yes, that must be that. This must be a way of bringing in those gullible tourist dollars. So,
Right, those Westerners, right? Those
Yeah.
silly Westerners.
but yes, so it's an interesting problem that I often have with writing books set in the 20s, because there's a lot of history between then and now, and things that we know without thinking about. You have to make them sound very foreign to the time. So it's no good just saying, this was before the Dracula thing, because nobody reading my particular book when it comes out next year is going to be able to just transplant Dracula out of their brain. So
Right. No, you're right. That's one of the great problems of historical research, and I think it's one of the reasons why we enjoy reading historical fiction. It's hard to think of the 1920s as historical fiction, but I guess now the 1960s are historical fiction. So, but I'm editing the Library of Congress Crime Classics series, and we've been focusing on books from the period sort of 1860 to 1960. And the first book in the series is Anna Catherine Green's That Affair Next Door, which came out in 1897, I think. No, it's set in it. It came out in 1899. Anyway, the point is, this is a foreign country. This is, we're talking about 120 years ago, when life, we think we sort of know what life was like because we've seen the movies. But they don't speak the same language. The customs are all different, and we need an interpreter. But why? Why do we want to read these? I also, one of the things that the Library of Congress series has been wrestling with, I guess is the way to put it, and yet we're trying hard not to be politically correct.
Mhm.
We have not Baudelarized any of the books. We have not rejected books as being non-PC. That doesn't mean we're going to look for a racist book, but when you read these
Yeah.
books and you find in them casual racism, casual sexism,
It's
um,
difficult. Yeah.
but it's important. That's my point. It's important that we leave that in there. For example, the last big book that I did was called Classic American Crime Fiction of the 1920s. That was just before this one. And so you have a novel from the 1920s in which I won't identify because it'll be a spoiler, in which passing for white turns out to be an important issue in the story. You have a novel in which race relations between the Asians and the whites in the story is very important. Not that we're good. It wasn't good. It was a bad thing, but it's part of our history.
Yeah.
And it's something that we need to look squarely in the face and not embrace, but acknowledge that that's who we were then, and we should be better now. Yeah,
true. I think that we probably will have some questions. I just wanted to mention that the new book that Les and I are doing comes out in
December. Yes, I think.
There it is. In League with Sherlock Holmes.
Cover. Beautiful.
It's got
cover.
a great cover, a super collection of people. And
you should say a word or two about sort of how what these are, because they're. I don't ever want people
collection.
to.
We've had this is the fifth one. Fifth one. 4 with Pegasus and 1 with Random House. That basically we approach our friends, grab them by the collar and say, you need to write a short story for us. And if Les does it, people say, oh, okay. And the basic theme is inspired by the Sherlock Holmes canon. And they've just been fascinating. You know, there's 16 to 18 stories in a book. All of them are different. Some of them are pastiches. Some of them are modern. Some of them have close reworking of stories. Some of them take a story and look at it from an alternative point of view, up to and including Michael Sims did one from the horse's point of view.
Right. It was Silver Blaze from the horse's perspective. Yes.
Yeah.
And S.J. Roseanne did the wonderful Men with the Twisted Lip, which showed that Holmes got it completely wrong in that case. But yes, I always want to be clear to people that if they're expecting a book of Sherlock Holmes stories, this ain't it.
No.
Some of them are Sherlock Holmes stories, but that's not what we ever asked for. And
it's an alternative universe, Sherlock Holmes.
People say, is it tough to edit these? And yeah, we ask A-list writers to write stories, and then we sit back and go, wow, that's a great story.
Oh, yeah. Yes, our big contributions tend to be, if you change this name, it would sort of play on one of the Sherlock Holmes stories.
Yeah. Well, I was talking about this earlier today with a friend, and I said, you and I are the perfect combination of editors, because I'm the nitpicker and you're the artist. And so I tend to go through the stories.
Why do I end up editing the things, Les?
Well, I end up saying things like, well, this detail is wrong. And you say things like, well, maybe this whole part of it needs to be reworked. But that's pretty rare, but once in a while. That's why I say you're the creative, I'm the lawyer.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Anyway, so John, do we have some questions from the
I don't
audience?
even know if there's an audience out there. Hi.
Hey, so we do. So a couple of people asked Laurie if you could tell us a little bit about Riviera Gold and where we find our beloved characters as the book starts.
Riviera Gold. The last book saw Russell and Holmes in Venice there's Riviera Gold. And no, that's not Mary Russell. I don't know who that is, but she's the spirit of summer, I guess. The book starts where Russell sets off on a sailing ship and ends up in the south of France because she knows that there's a possibility that Mrs. Hudson may be there. Mrs. Hudson had to flee England a number of years ago, and a number of months ago, and had
And a number of books
Russell,
ago too. Yes.
yeah, two books ago. And Russell hasn't heard from her since. So she's hoping that she might be able to track down Mrs. Hudson, her beloved Mrs. Hudson. And she ends up in the American expatriate community that is just in the process of coming into being in the south of France. The time when Sarah and Gerald Murphy were making a sort of autistic commune of people ranging from Hemingway to the Fitzgeralds to Picasso and everybody else, who mostly worked in Paris, but would come down to the south of France starting at about now. This is 1925. And I discovered when I was doing research that there's some really interesting individuals in Monaco at the time, in Monte Carlo, including the most dreadful arms dealer who lived in Monaco starting in the 20s. So I had a lot of fun. That's where it begins, and the two of them do hunt down Mrs. Hudson, who is in trouble.
This book really this really would be fun to annotate, because you have just such a wonderful stew of characters there that aren't all identified. Let's see, they're not given their full names. Let's put it that way.
No, so you come across Scotty.
Yeah.
And if you know the area and the time, you know that's F. Scott Fitzgerald. But if you don't, it's just Scotty.
And so Cynthia has asked, I know that you just did recently a novella where we got to see Kate Martinelli, but do you have any plans to go back to her?
I would love to go back to Kate. I have another book in the contract, my current contract that I'm working on now. And after that, I would like to do a Kate at some point. So either in the following year or the year after. The novella that I did is called Beginnings, and it picks up an event from Kate's youth that affects her choices. The death of her younger sister when Kate is in university. Kate Martinelli is a San Francisco homicide detective. When you meet her in Grave Talent in '93, it came out. So I talk about historical fiction.
Yeah.
Things have changed a lot. I keep telling the publishers of the early books, you really need to put a date on there. You really need to, because otherwise it makes no sense. Why doesn't she just pick up her phone?
That's right. Well, the battery died.
Lots of batteries are dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, Beginnings picks up this event that happened, that is just mentioned in Grave Talent, in which Kate discovers that the death that she thought was simply an accident was probably not. And the fact that her own daughter is about the age of her sister when she died means that the idea of suicide has really hit home, and she really needs to look into it. So that's where Beginnings takes us. And I would like to make one that picks up after the end of that.
I have a question about that, because we were talking about Neil Gaiman, and when you wrote Grave Talent, and you put that death in there, did you think to yourself, I'm not quite sure what this is all about, but I'll get to it later? Or was it just sort of an accident?
No, it was a loss. It was a thing that that made darker Kate's already kind of dark time at university. I mean, some people had a good time at Cal, less, but not everybody. Yes. And so no, I don't think that I had any idea at the time that I would pick it up. It must have kind of stayed in the back of my head though, because when I thought about writing a novella, that's where my head went. I mean,
well, yeah, I didn't mean to make it sound quite so intentional. This is one of the things I was shocked when I did Sandman, is when I did the annotated Sandman, was to find something that was in issue 8 turn out to be a full story in issue 50, meaning it was written 2 or 3 years later.
Yeah.
And it was like, yeah, it just was something that seemed sort of, it had more weight than it ever should have back in issue 8. But Neil knew it belonged there. And it sounds like it was the same thing for you. You didn't really say to yourself, I'm going to use this later, but you put something in there that had weight because it was right.
Yeah. I mean, the writer's mind is an interesting place.
Yes.
I'm the sort of person that you would expect to be an outliner, to be methodical and organized when it comes to where these books are going and how many they're going and what they're doing in each book. And I'm not. I am strictly an organic and instinctual writer. But it means that because I've done this an awful lot, I know that that I can trust my instincts. And
that's where I was going.
Yeah,
that's what I was driving at. It isn't necessarily, oh, I'm going to plant this seed here and then I'm going to harvest it 28 books later. It's just that when you're, no, it's organic. I really, I believe that. I believe me, I have no real talent for fiction that I'm able to, other than as a lawyer, that I'm aware of.
Sorry for us now.
I've written one novel which is firmly buried in the drawer, but a
short story. You had a short story in one of the books.
Story you edited and published. That was very kind of you. But when I was writing the novel, it's sort of in the 3rd chapter, something happened on the page, and I have no idea where it came from. It just sort of was what came out next, and I looked at it, it was like, whoa. And
welcome to my world.
Yeah.
So that actually leans into one of the questions that we had for you, Laurie, is, when you're writing, do you have conversations with your characters in your head? And if you do they change anything in a book that you didn't expect to happen?
I don't know that having conversations with the characters is the right picture, because that would mean that there's some give and take in negotiation. Mostly I'm following the analogy of writing a book by driving down a road and you can't see past your headlights, but you can see that far, and so that's how far you go. I think that every so often I'll come to a place where I won't know what's going on. And I get the kind of stuck that they call writer's block. That means you'd really rather go mop the floor. And so that there's something that I haven't noticed that's going wrong, that there's something about the plot is pushing me towards a dead end, and I haven't noticed it yet consciously, but the back of my head, there's a little, organizing principle back there that's saying, wait, stop, don't go there. So I think that for those of us who write in that way, in an organic fashion, there's a rule book in the back of the head that the story is following, because when it starts going off it, you can feel it. But if I had a conversation with the character about where they were going to be 8 chapters from now, they wouldn't know any more than I did. So
Janet Ivanovich, I think, said something like, what do you do when the characters start going in a direction that you don't want them to go? And she said, I shoot them in the back. But
but that's Janet Ivanovich for you.
That's Janet.
Yeah.
You're a much nicer person.
So Laurie, Cindy asked if there was anything unexpected or what unexpected things you found kind of in Romania. Was there anything that surprised you there?
I loved Romania. I had no idea what I was going to find there. So my friends who run the Poison Pen bookstore, the one that Les was talking about, we had the unusual crowd, and then he must have hit it on a night where there were other things going on in town, because
anything else.
and,
Anything.
they were headed off for a tour down the Danube or up the Danube from the base. And they said, oh, you should come. And I had never been on a cruise of any kind. So I said, okay, because I'll try anything once. So we met up in Bucharest. And there was a kind of overnight trip up into Transylvania and then downriver. And I thought Romania was just the most fascinating place. And I mean, the fact that it went through this awful communist regime for 30 years, and yet pulled out the other side with, just insouciance and the flair and I just loved the country. It made me so happy.
I was there in 2007, and I'm not sure how much it's changed since then, but Bucharest was a very sophisticated city. Parts of it, to me, look like Paris. I mean, just beautiful city. The countryside in Romania was very rural. In 2000s, I spent a lot of time in the countryside and didn't see a single tractor.
Yeah.
People were plowing their fields with oxen, walking behind them, pulling, and so on. It was still very, very rural outside of the big city.
When Romania came into the common market, the EU said, "Oh, you can't farm with horses. You got to get tractors. Here's some tractors. We'll give you lots of tractors." So the Romanian farmers said, "Okay, we'll use your tractors." So they used the tractors, and then of course tractors break down, right? And they're expensive to fix because they're modern tractors, and you can't just pieces in. So the tractors went, dragged off behind the barn, and the horses out, and they finished. Except in that period of time in between the tractors and the non-tractors, the EU had suddenly discovered sustainable agriculture. And the EU said, oh, look, you're doing a sustainable agriculture. Oh, great.
Right.
And the Romanians
Can you teach the rest of
okay.
us? Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, this is my kind of attitude towards life of, our tractors die. So, hey, we're sustainable. Make us an example and give us a prize. Is there money in it? Oh, good.
Our next question is from Sharon, and she asks if you have any advice for beginning authors.
Les, what is your advice for a beginning author?
Well, I love the expression used by many authors, which is the secret to writing is ass in chair, which is to say, basically, do it.
Yeah.
As a lawyer, I have never had the luxury of saying, "Oh, I have writer's block." I can't say to a client, "I can't get that contract done because I have writer's block," or whatever.
I have lawyer's block.
Right. Journalists are much the same way. It's just it's something that you just do. It's work. So the advice for writers is sit down in your chair and write. You may throw it away at the end of the day, but write.
I think that most new writers expect the first draft to be something good. And if it's not good, then they're a failure. People who are more experienced know that no, a first draft is crap. I mean, a first draft is awful. I don't give anyone a first draft. I've been doing this a long time. I don't give anyone my first draft except my editor, and only because she needs to make sure that I do actually have a book. The advantage of a first draft is that you can make it better. If you have 3 crap, you can make it better crap. If you do anything because you're throwing it out, then you have nothing to make better. So, that's really the answer for writing, is to just produce words, knowing that they're bad, knowing they're the wrong words, knowing that you can change them. When I started, I was writing by longhand, and I would have a friend type it for me. And when I would retype it, anytime I had to change it, you'd get out that either the snowpake for individual words, or they had this white tape that you had to put over a line, and they'd make it in various thicknesses for 1 line or 2 lines. lines. And there were some of my pages that were so thick with this stuff that, they kind of had this hillock going up in the middle, and you had to feed it carefully through the Xerox machine when you wanted to make a clean copy of it. So, things are a lot easier with the computer because you can just cut and paste, and instead of literally cutting and pasting, it's much simpler. So, but yeah, I mean, any first draft is rubbish, so don't worry about it. Just do it.
And this next one sort of goes kind of along the writing process thing. So how do you keep the chronology with the continuing history of Russell and Holmes straight in a book without having to spend too much space kind of catching people up on that history?
It's always tricky, isn't it? Because you hope that each hardback will bring in some new readers. On the other hand, the fact that they only have to look in and see that you're looking at number 15 or 16 or 23 means that they're probably not going to plunk down their $30 for a new hardback. But you have to have some balance between giving the complete backstory and giving enough of it so that they understand the ground they're standing on. I tend to scatter stuff through the first chapter or so that, you always get the name Sherlock Holmes and the fact that she's married to him fairly early on.
It's usually on the cover too.
Yeah, well, yeah. You do get it on the cover. But I think that the average reader is experienced enough to be able to sort of pick up, even if they don't understand exactly where the book has come from, and pick up as they go. So.
Well, so for example, I mean, without any spoilers, I don't want to talk about spoilers, but in Riviera Gold, I mean, it's clear that Mrs. Hudson has a past, not just a past that's 30 years before, but a past that's relatively recent, covered in The Murder of Mary Russell. And there are enough allusions to it that you don't have to go back and reread The Murder of Mary Russell. Similarly, there are references to, if I may say, Holmes's son. You don't have to go back and read the books in which we meet Holmes's son. I mean, you sort of build that in. But do you find yourself going back to have to look something up in one of your books to check something?
Yeah, I've now I've got a doc that I keep on my desktop that is a sort of master chronology, and in fact, I think most of it is on the website. I think that I've got it on the Russell and Holmes book page. It might be down at the bottom of that it says which book takes place when. Because when you get as many stories as I do, and some of them take place in two different timelines, I do have to make sure that they fit together, so that there's a gap here and there's a gap there. There's a gap between the end of Garment of Shadows when they leave Morocco and the beginning of Dreaming Spies when they have just got back from Istanbul. And so at some point they have to get to Istanbul, but since I haven't been there yet, it's kind of hard to
see. Now I'm your expert on that too. I was there.
I know.
So our last question also leads perfectly into a question of location. Kay asks, do you ever decide to set a book in a certain locale just because the place lures you and then you have to figure out how the plot fits?
Oh, never.
Yeah, and the tricky part of that is when you fall in love with a place and you think, I gotta set a book here. And so you take a million pictures and you go everywhere and you think, this will be great. And then you get home and you do the research and you find that the one place you didn't go in is the place that you absolutely need. So when I went to Fez, Morocco, I had intended only to go to Casablanca because I needed a scene for Pirate King at the end of it where they go to Casablanca. So, and that's okay. We're there. We can't go onto that side anyway, so I can just make it all up. So that's fine. But then we had a couple weeks holiday, and so I went up to Fez, and so it was great fun and had lovely time, and went in here, went in there, and when I got back and was actually starting to put the book together, I discovered that one of the buildings that I had stepped into, but had never gone into because you had to be on a tour, was the house inside the old city that the governor lived in, that Leo Tay lived in. And I had actually been there and I didn't notice it, but I only realized it when I was looking at this. Managed to track down a photograph of it, and I thought, funny, that looks kind of familiar. So fortunately, the advantage of travel is that you know people on the ground then. And I could write to the guy that we had stayed with, and he had taken us around places. And I could say, can you get inside there and take some pictures for me? And he said, sure. So,
and you also do, book research in that sense too. I know you have Baedekers and things like that.
Yeah. But
because you need to know what was this like in 1920.
Yeah, the problem is that a lot of the research is what I do afterwards. And so, especially in the case, like you were saying, John, is that, when I fall in love with a place and then want to write the book, I have to sort of scratch my head and say, well, what about those places I didn't go?
Well, thank you so much again for joining us tonight. If you guys tuned in the middle, we've been talking to Laurie King about the newest Mary Russell book, Riviera Gold, that just came out a couple of weeks ago. We have signed book plates to go with our copies, so make sure you get those ordered. We've also been talking to Les Klinger, who helped edit the collection For the Sake of the Game, which just came out in paperback as well. They've got a new one called In League with Sherlock Holmes coming out in December. If you are interested in the annotated American Gods, you can order that through our website, murderbooks.com. The store is still closed to the public. We're offering curbside pickup and mail orders, so you can reach us Monday through Saturday, 12 to 6 at 713-524-8597 or murderbooks.com. You can also email us at order@murderbooks.com and we can take care of you there. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight. This was really great.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I couldn't get to Houston this year, but
next time, hopefully. We'll keep our fingers crossed. Yeah. Y'all take care.
Thanks.
Bye, Les.
Bye, Laurie.